Hi everyone, I'm James from F9 Audio and the Freemasons, and welcome to a very exciting little introduction. The great guys at ghas Audio have brought down 3 of the brand new releases from the Roland Corporation. These are Roland's brand new boutique synths, and just as everyone was hoping and was kind of guessing they may have done from the kind of teaser shots that went out a few weeks ago, they are re-representing some of their past glories in analog synthesis. So here re-represented is the Juno 106, probably one of the most successful polysynths ever made. And here it's called the JU06, the JX3P, which is a kind of later addition to the Roland range, but incredibly popular and still selling very well on the second-hand market, is been recreated in the form of the JX03, and Roland's probably most famous and almost legendary synth, the Jupiter 8, is connected here to the optional keyboard from this range, and it's called the JP08. Now, to just give you a little bit of information on what's actually going on, these are miniature versions of their classics, and they've done an incredible job at miniaturizing pretty much everything, including most of the front panel controls. We have a slider that either works as a pitch controller, or if it's not connected to the actual keyboard, will trigger notes. As you can hear, hopefully, maybe on one of the other camera mics here, there is a tiny inbuilt speaker in the back of it, so it's quite good fun just to be mucking about with, even when it's not connected to any amplification. You've also got another ribbon controller here that will allow for modulation. Now, one thing to make very, very clear, there are going to be limited numbers of these coming into the UK by the looks of things. So if you are interested in any of these, get talking to the guys at ghas and get your orders in quickly, because no one's sure exactly how many units are ever going to be made, and these could turn into collector's items. So I would highly suggest, if you're looking at this and like so many of us at the moment, your wallets are twitching, get on the phone now, and because no one's sure how long these are actually going to be out in the marketplace for. Right, so let's just take a quick look at the outputs and the MIDI controls on the back of one of these synths. The first thing you're going to notice is everything is on mini jacks, and considering the size of the back panel, I think it really should have, even just on, there should have been one output that was a proper stereo jack. Now, these units will work in stereo. Obviously, we've got chorus emulations and dual mode emulations, so this is a stereo output. Headphones, obviously, and there is an input as well. Now, we've not been through all of the stuff to see exactly what you can do with that, but I'm assuming there may be some fun to be had with the filters. You'll also see that there is a micro USB connector here, and you can input MIDI into this synth, and audio will actually come out of it. Now, there's no USB connections in the actual box, so we've got no way of testing here what kind of output the audio stream is. For example, on the TR8, the recent drum machine release, it runs at 96K, which can be a little bit problematic getting the audio into some DAWs, because you've either got to run at a high rate or use some sample rate correction. Standard MIDI in and out connections, no through, and a little locking section, and that's it. The nice construction about all of this is it's all metal on the back here. Now, when I flip this over, it is actually plastic on the back. And it's battery powered. That's what we're running off on all of these units today. So obviously incredibly portable. There's a built-in speaker here, and this section here is where the ribbon cable for the additional keyboard, or the extra keyboard that you can buy, is going to go in. There's some quite little fiddly locking mechanisms here for when you actually put it onto the keyboard. It was a little bit difficult to actually get in, but considering its size, it's quite a chunky unit, and as I say, the metal and the finish on the front panel is really nice of something of this size and price point. So here is the recreation and boutique style of the Juno 106. Anyone who's ever come across a Juno 106, 60 or 6 will be instantly familiar with the control layout. This is pretty much absolutely identical in terms of controls to any of the Juno series. And the patch and recall system is identical also to the Juno 106. Now, you can actually set these so that they lay down as well, which is quite nice. All of the synths you can do that with the keyboard, but for the purposes of filming, we'll just use the back support so you can see what's going on. Okay, so does this sound like a Juno? Well, Junos are, in my view, famous for 2 things. Beautiful pads, nice warm pads, and thick old basses. And for me, yes, this definitely works. The Juno was a single oscillator synth, exactly the same as this. So in the DCO section, you effectively have controls between either a sawtooth or a pulse width, a pulse or square waveform. Let's just turn it so you can just hear just the wave. And it had a pulse width control that you had control over manually, or you could control with the LFO. It also has a sub oscillator and a separate noise control. And from such simplistic designs, this really became a kind of classic. It's very easy to use and very easy to understand how to build synthesis patches from these controls. Let me quickly go back to this patch. Another thing that was incredibly famous on the Junos were the chorus circuits, and it's perfectly done here. They've even modelled the hiss from the actual circuits. And just like a Juno 106, you can hit both of them in together. Very clever little, nice little touch there. It was a kind of trick that was used by an awful lot of producers on Junos. And you can hear the effect that both of these circuits have on the sound. Here we've got the JP08 on top of its effective grandfather, the Jupiter 8. As you can see, there's an enormous size difference that we've talked about already. But when you think about the actual relative values of this thing, this is less than 1/10 of the value of the second-hand prices that are currently going around on the Jupiter 8. So it is already fantastic value for money. Don't forget, this is an 8-voice synth, this is a 4-voice synth. And particularly when you put this into one of the dual or unison modes, you're going to find you've only got 2 notes of polyphony, whereas with this, in the same kind of situation, that you're going to have just 4, but it's still, it's effectively half and half. Now, the one thing I was really surprised on with this, when I first saw some of the leaked pictures that had kind of come out that did the rounds really, really quickly, is I couldn't see the unison solo or poly modes that this is so famous for. And when you stick something like a Jupiter 8 into unison mode, it gets big, fat and wide and does some of the magic. Initially, this kind of put me off the whole idea of that, because for me, this is some of the beauty of this monster. And I was amazed to find that it's actually there. It's a kind of little dual key press. You hit the dual button here and then you can select between solo, unison and poly mode. And there you see one of the slight problems with all of this. It's just a little bit movable. It's not got much weight. But wonderful to have them actually on board, because it just means that you can get bigger, fat sounds, particularly in dual mode when you can stack 2 different voices together. So does this sound like that? Well, one of the kind of classic Jupiter 8 sounds is the kind of early electro soul, the late 80s, or sorry, the early 80s electro funk that was kind of going around. Little bit of pitch modulation, nice juicy filter. And what we need to know is whether we can get that to sound a little bit like that. So first of all, let's just hear the Jupiter 8 version of the noise. And let's hear this one now. Unfortunately, let me just turn it on, that would help. I've not found any way yet of actually shoving the keyboard up to an actual different octave. So we could actually rechain the oscillators, but the key follow, or the key follow on the filter, is quite an important part of the Jupiter 8 sound. And what I've found in just the initial investigations is that it's pretty accurate. So if I just go just to the JP08, so that is this synth being played from the Jupiter as a MIDI controller. And let me switch back to the Jupiter 8. And as you can hear, there may be just a tiny difference on the envelope, and it's quite difficult to actually get an exact copy, obviously, when you look at the fader length of something on the Jupiter 8 of one of the controls here, and the fader length on the actual JP8. It's pretty fiddly to actually get going, but you can get a pretty good representation of anything that you're trying to achieve. Even down on the bottom. That's the Jupiter. Here's the JP08. But the beauty is when we've actually, just for a little quick test here, set them up in stereo, they sound wonderful together. So I actually think they've done a miraculous job of trying to get the guts from this beast into a tiny unit this small. And I'm assuming, I'm not seeing the actual specs yet, but this is all down to their analog circuit behavior technology that they've used on the TR8 and the System 1. So for me, being a very proud owner of one of the original boxes, do I think this sounds like that? I think actually it sounds as close as you're going to get for something at this price point. And it certainly does a better job than some of the other emulations that have come along the way. And being able to have full tweakable control of every control and everything, absolutely everything that is on that panel mirrored on this panel, means it's a kind of no-brainer. So this one's quite interesting. The JX3P is quite an odd little synth. It didn't really have any external controls on it as the actual synth. You had to buy a separate programmer for it. So what you've got represented here is the original synth, which was semi-preset as well. Banks A and B actually contained kind of standard sounds that you may even find on home organs, all that kind of thing. And the third bank allowed you to actually store patches, and that's, as I say, totally replicated here. Same patch store procedure. If you want to store anything, you go into the bank and then you press and hold the actual, whoa, that's just jumped. You press and hold the actual memory location, and when the light flashes, the patch is actually saved. But just as nice and warm as the original. And the chorus circuit that you heard on the original synth. Now this is a 2 oscillator synth, so it's a little bit more flexible than the actual Juno. And one of the beauties of it, it had some serious cross modulation capabilities between the two. So when you look at this and the JP08, they're slightly more advanced from the original Junos, but each of them all have their own character. Let me show you quickly what I mean by some of this crazy cross modulation. And there's a variety of different modes. That you can really dig into, even on some quite basic sounds, once you actually start to apply it. Ooh. Even with these tiny controls, you can see there's plenty of fun to be had, even just on the bass oscillator section. Again, there's a high pass filter, the same on all three of these synths. There's a nice juicy sweepable low pass in there as well, and a similar envelope control system to the actual Juno, so it's kind of shared either between the VCA or the VCF, and depending on how it's set up. So as we say, we've got preset banks here of sounds, all good fun. But the real fun is when you stick this thing in manual and you really start to play with it and kind of delve in, like all of these actually. So on all of these three units, there's a small inbuilt sequencer, and we haven't really had a great deal of time to actually play with this at the moment, but it does seem to be quite good fun. It's I think it's either an 8 or 16 note. You can actually change time signatures within it. Obviously this will be MIDI clockable, and I'm assuming they'll all be synchronizable together, and particularly with Roland's TR8 drum machine. But let me give you a quick idea of what it's capable of. Now there are some controls in here to actually change the gate time. We found it earlier on around here, so you can actually, I think control the gate time from here and actually select certain tempo ranges from this as well. So the unit will function completely by itself, but obviously the beauty of this is being able to synchronize it in either for your live performances or for studio work. So we'll have another investigation and see how far we can get onto that, but certainly a very useful addition to all three ranges or all three units that are available here. For me, I think this is great. This is one that's really interested me because of the cross modulation system. It just seems to be a little bit more powerful than the Juno. As much as I love the Juno, it is quite a simplistic synth, and this one I think will stand up to some much bigger brethren, or some of its major competitors that are an awful lot more complicated. Okay, so this is probably the one everyone's getting the most excited about because it is a replication of Roland's most famous synth, the Jupiter 8. And it's got a lot of the soul, even in the sound of something this small. Most importantly, every single control that you will have found on an original Jupiter 8 is replicated in miniature form here. Again, we're going to find some stepping, obviously, with the size of the controls. The patch recall system is identical to a Jupiter 8, and the thing that got me the most excited is, although the Jupiter didn't have a built-in chorus section or any kind of stereo width processing, you could trick it into doing so by either running it in unison mode, where the voices would be shared between the stereo outputs, or you can have it in dual mode and you have two slightly different sounds, maybe one slightly detuned, and that will give you a wider sound field, and that is achievable here as well, which, as I say, is just incredibly exciting. And bearing in mind this is a 4-voice synth, even though it says the JP08 on it, but with the polychain capability, you should be able to create effectively the guts of a Jupiter 8 with just 2 units. And when you think about the pricing point, bearing in mind all of these I'm assuming are going to be just under £300, I think the other ones are somewhere near the 240 to 220 range, not sure of retail just yet, we'll see when they come out. But that's a massive saving compared to buying a vintage unit, and using the digital technology, this isn't really going to stuff up in the same way a vintage synth is. So what does it sound like? Well, to me it actually sounds great fun. It's been good fun having it in this morning whilst we've had a look through. It's got the juice of the original. You've got the switchable filter on one of these, between 24 dB and 12 dB. And I've got to say, the actual cutoff controls here feel a little bit better than, or they just seem to have a little bit more values than the ones on some of the other synths. Not quite sure why, but I'm glad. And that just shows you how far digital modelling has come on since its early days. Now, as I say, the beauties of a Jupiter 8 was actually being able to spread the voices. That's perfectly capable here. You have a unison mode, but it's also quite a good idea just to run in dual. So how the Jupiter 8 introduced a new format of voicing that Roland's carried through still to this day, and that's having upper and lower partials effectively. And you can have, when it's in dual mode, one sound on the upper section and one sound of the lower. Now this was originally for split keyboard. Obviously there's no splitting available on this unit, so just think of these as a kind of A and B section that are playing simultaneously when you select the dual mode. So let's just find a preset that could look like it could sound better in stereo. So let's say take this sync sound. Nice, but you'll hear it's completely mono here. I'm going to turn on the dual mode, and this button here will flip between, you'll see the patch numbers change here, the upper and lower sections of the synth. So consider them just running multi-timbrally together at the moment. Now if we turn them both to the same sound, you'll hear it's gone stereo. Mono. Now it doesn't have to be the same sound. That's the beauty of the way this was set up in the original, that you could kind of add, you could make 2 pad sounds, or even take a sound like this that's fairly similar. Let's go to a basic, let's take a slightly funky sound here. Whoop. And we'll put this in dual mode, turn both of them to this sound. Now, the front panel controls are now available to either one of these sounds. So if I detune this top, the upper level slightly here, and then go to the lower level and then turn the tuning here. Oh, you can hear the voice polyphony kick off there. And now these panel controls are only, at this time, affecting one side of it. Now it would be nice to see that link, so you could actually use the control, you can see the panels, use the panels control, sorry, to actually access both temporary memory locations at once. But if you want to then save one of these setups in dual mode, you actually just press and hold on these patch presets. So these patch presets contain a kind of dual setup, so it's almost the entire synth, or both sides of it, with the relevant patch numbers, and you've got 8 of those available. And there you've got that classic modulated sound that we're so used to from the old Jupiters. As I say, 4-voice polyphonic, and it does pretty much everything you'd expect a Jupiter to do, particularly with all of the replications of the front panel controls. So I've had about an hour now to muck around with all of these little beauties, and I've got to say they're incredibly good fun. The one thing I wasn't quite expecting was how easy all of the sounds are going to fit together. I've got some of the original units, and with anything vintage you've got to preamp it properly, you've got to compress it properly if you're going to get it all fitting together, and you're going to have to do quite a lot of post-processing. These are almost like perfect versions of the original synths. In other words, as being a digital recreation, even though they've got some analog movement in there, they do sound theoretically brilliant, if that makes sense. And as a result, they're dead easy to kind of get into tracks and start mucking around with. A couple of things we have found out. I wanted to go and get some micro USB cables and tried to plug it into this computer, but the driver will not load on anything lower than 10.9 for a Mac, and I think Windows 8 for Windows. So do check the driver specifications, because there are some nice bits like sending MIDI via USB to that. And if you're after a micro USB lead, the Samsung phones are exactly the same type as the USB here. The other thing is as well, particularly on the Jupiter 8, most Kenton MIDI retrofits will only go to a certain range. So in other words, you can only go to a certain lowest note and a certain highest notes, and then it starts repeating. These go much, much, much higher. I've really been able to work with the MIDI keyboard here and push octaves right up. So that's a great sign. But yeah, I would highly recommend you check them out. I have put together a kind of, well, given the era where these all came out and what they're hinting towards, quite an 80s sounding track with just a few drums from the TR8. So what I may do with the guys at GAC is, GAK Audio, is give them the actual files so they can be available in store if you want to see them or hear them, so you can actually hear the synths as they're kind of fitting together. Nothing was done to them apart from just a little bit of EQ, compression and reverb. The preamps are just all flat, there's no EQ coming from the outside, but they do fit together absolutely beautifully.